JJ Cooper joins us now, executive editor, Baseball America. JJ, thanks for doing this.
Oh, happy to do it.
Yeah, Forrest Wall. Love that name. And he comes with Chad Spanberger. I mean, that deal was full of spectacular names in the Sun 1-0 deal. Who is the guy that you think has the greatest possibility to be an impact major leaguer of the prospects the Blue Jays have acquired?
We actually, we're insane. We know this, but we ranked all 69 players who've been traded, prospects who've been traded in the last 6 weeks coming up to the deadline. And we have Hector Perez 6th.
Wow,
so
really?
That's our guy who we think. Now, again, the thing that's tough with all this, the first thing is that just looking at the big picture of all these trades, what really does stand out is elite prospects did not get traded. And so being 6th on that list is not exactly the same as being 6th on our top 100 or anything like that. But Hector Perez does have a lot of traits that could make him a very useful big leaguer.
That's really interesting. But you mentioned, there were no top prospects traded. And I guess when you're dealing with rental players, that's generally going to be the deal. But do you feel like baseball's moving in a direction where we're valuing prospects more than ever before?
I think and rentals are being devalued. I think you hit on it. Like if you look at the big players, the best players who were traded for big leaguers, they're almost without fail is for players who have multiple years left on their contracts. Chris Archer got a pretty good haul. The Rays got a pretty good haul back for Chris Archer. Now they're big leaguers, they're guys who've already graduated from being prospects, but the reason they're able to do that is he has multiple years left on his contract. You look at the Padres got the best prospect who was traded, Francisco Mejia, catcher from the Indians. They were able to get that because they traded for a pair of relievers who have many years left on their contracts. The rentals, the thing about it is we heard all this talk about Bryce Harper being traded. Oh, Bryce Harper could be traded. Well, people don't like to say this, but the reality is J.D. Martinez was traded at the deadline last year and was incredible for the Diamondbacks over the final couple of months of the season. He's every bit as good for a 1 month, 1 year rental as Bryce Harper, and they didn't get almost anything back for him. I think that's kind of the reason, one of the reasons that Bryce Harper's still a National is you can't trade Bryce Harper and have everyone in D.C. say, well, is that all you got? And probably it would have been, well, that's all you got? Because it's only for a couple of months.
Right. And it's funny as a baseball fan, and this is why your job is one of the hardest, I think, in sports, managing expectations and even figuring out who some of these guys are is very, very difficult. There are so many prospects. There are so many leagues. How do you think overall? I mean, the Jays shipped out a lot of players, more than they ever have before. How would you rate their overall success on trade deadline day?
I would say that when it's all said and done, when the dust clears, if Toronto gets I'm talking about starters, 2 guys who, whether it's Billy McKinney in the outfield or it's Hector Perez in the rotation or Hector Perez in a key role in the bullpen, and then just say one more guy. Let's say David Paulino, who has all kinds of talent but has never really put it together and had real trouble staying healthy. Let's say he stays healthy. Or let's say that Chad Spanberger, who you talked about, who's having a great year in low A, as a guy who's a little bit old for low A and was playing in a really good hitter's park for a slugger. Let's say that, no, this is absolutely legit. He ends up being their everyday first baseman someday down the road. Or maybe Forrest Wall, change of scenery helps him put it all together, and he ends up being an everyday outfielder. Or maybe Santiago Espinal, this is best season so far. Maybe he has a better season in his future and ends up being a 500, 400 at-bat guy who plays second base and shortstop. That would be a really good haul out of this. I think that's a realistic expectation. Probably more realistic is one really good starter and then 2 or 3 other guys who contribute. That would still be a pretty good haul because a lot of the guys who get traded this time, the prospects that get traded, are guys who are either years away with a whole lot of risk or guys who are already seen as being kind of role players who may fill a pretty small role.
Mm. Well, yeah, and it's man, for baseball fans in this city, we get caught up in it because, well, the Blue Jays employ the top prospect in all of baseball, who's now at AAA, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but there's a whole lot of names there too, right? There's Bo Bichette and there's Biggio, and we're all in love with what Danny Jansen has done this season and looking at the future of the catching position. So let's talk about those four guys in particular. And I know Biggio's kind of just put himself on the map this year with his performance, really, really a huge uptick. But of those four guys, and as Vlad's as much of a lock as you get with prospects, but we've seen locks not quite live up to expectation before. Brandon Wood was like, that guy was going to make it. Matt Wieters, sliced bread was the best thing since Matt Wieters, right? And he had a fine career and everything. Matt Laporta, the key to the CC Sabathia deal. There's been lots of guys that were top prospects that didn't pan out. But of those four guys who are not like the guys they acquired at the deadline, these guys are already, those are upper echelon prospects. Of the four, what's the reasonable expectation on success rate of Vlad Jr., Bo Bichette, Kevin Biggio, Danny Jansen?
No, that's fair. Now, that's you're looking at this the right way. To expect all those guys to turn out would be an almost unseen hit rate for a team. That being said, if Vladimir Guerrero Jr. doesn't end up being one of the better players in the major leagues, I'm going to be shocked. I'm going to be floored. The hit rate on number one prospects is really good. Like you mentioned, like a Laporta, like those are guys. Laporta was a top 30 prospect. And the hit rate on those is pretty good, but you get up to number one of a guy who's doing it at the age he's doing it, that has already the track record he has, who has scouts basically putting him in the Hall of Fame almost already. A guy like that to completely fail, like failure for that almost – we talk about Andrew Jones. Vladimir Guerrero Sr. just went into the Hall of Fame. If we were talking about Vladimir Guerrero Sr. when he was a prospect, he was always kind of in the same leagues a lot of times. It was a little bit overshadowed. I was fortunate enough to see both of them as low Class A guys, but it was always overshadowed by Andrew Jones. And now looking back on it, we almost feel a little disappointed by Andrew Jones. Everyone looking at it, it's like, okay, he was good, but, man, I thought he was going to be really great. And that's kind of, but at the same time, he was like a 15-year big leaguer who, is a cusp of the Hall of Fame kind of guy. Again, if Vladimir Guerrero is in a different category than even a Bo Bichette. If Vlad fails, it'll be other than some sort of horror, catastrophic injury, it'll be a shocking development.
Yeah.
Even with Bo Bichette, that's a guy who fits in the category of most of these guys work out, but not all of them do. And then when you get down to that next level, Danny Jansen has to prove. Now, again, he's done a lot. Danny Jansen has to prove he can be an everyday catcher. And, that then becomes catching's really hard. There's a lot of attributes to it that you almost fully discover once a guy's a big leaguer. So let's make that a 50-50 shot. As you said, Kevin Biggio, when I wrote up Kevin Biggio coming out of the draft, never would have imagined he had this kind of power, although we see a lot of hitters now develop power with swing adjustments and all. But if Kevin Biggio or Kevin Smith or guys like that, then you are talking about, I would say that, if you have three of those guys, it's realistic to hope that one of them ends up being a really useful big leaguer. Because, again, we are talking about the hit rate at that level is two notches lower than when we talk about the Danny Jansens of the world, who does now have 2 years of production at AA or above. So, yeah, then you start tailing off. I mean, again, there's other guys in the system. It's a really good system now. There's other guys who definitely have a shot to be. And Nate Pearson, if he can come back from a pretty scary injury, Nate Pearson has front of the rotation type stuff. But there's a lot of potholes that could get in the way between where he is now and big league success.
Yeah, you just want to have as many bullets in the chamber if you're the Blue Jays, enough rolls of the dice. I know one of the goals of this regime was to rebuild, to restock the minor league system that was not totally dismantled, but a large part of it was sent out of town at that non-waiver trade deadline by Alex Anthopoulos in 2015. Where would you rank the Blue Jays system? You said it's better. Is it one of the best in baseball?
There's this group right now, like the Padres, the Rays. They're exceptional. I mean, they have exceptionally deep, talented farm systems. But no, if you said right now, I mean, we're going to have an updated ranking coming out real soon, like probably the next week or so, and they're going to rank very high on it. Again, it's not going to be one, it's not going to be two. But I'll put it this way. You're not going to be scrolling into the teens and looking for the Blue Jays. They're going to be well before that. So, I'll be a little bit, oblique on it beyond that because I want people to see the rankings. But, yes, this is one of the better farm systems in baseball.
JJ, we've heard a lot about Vlad. We've heard a lot about Bo Bichette. Recently, we've heard a lot about Danny Jansen. But one guy that you mentioned and that Ben mentioned, Kevin Biggio, that's a guy that, we knew the name, so it sort of stood out. But he actually has had a great performance. What kinds of things has he done this year to really distinguish himself in a way that maybe he hadn't before?
Well, he's changed his stance. He's changed his swing. When he was coming out of Notre Dame, I really kind of, again, scouts, I shouldn't say me, more I would say scouts who I talked to, they kind of thought of him as a guy who had a pretty good understanding of the strike zone. But that didn't really matter that much because he really just didn't do much with it when he did find a pitch that he could hit. And he's lowered his hands, which sometimes makes a difference. It really kind of depends on who you are, but sometimes that makes a big difference. For him, it's meant that his swing is a little quicker. His swing, he gets to the zone quicker. He can make a decision a little later. But more importantly, with that, he's just kind of it's allowed him also to kind of find some of the power that maybe was always in there, or maybe, again, I don't have the perfect answer for why the power is there now when it really wasn't before, but I do think that plays a part in it. And I think also there's a part of, pro development, strength training and all. But if you had told me that he would hit 21 homers and we still got a month of the season to go, I just wouldn't have believed it because that was so far beyond anything he did. And again, this is not a high school guy. This is a guy who was one of the best players on Notre Dame's, team. We kind of felt like we had a decent idea of who this guy was, and he's ended up being much better than he was. Again, it's a credit to the Blue Jays scouting and, player development. We're talking about a 5th-round pick who right now, if you're redoing the draft, he would go at least 100 spots higher than he did in the draft.
Yeah, he's a real thing now. I get an electric shock every question that we ask that doesn't involve Vladimir Guerrero Jr., so we have to ask another one about him. And, yeah, the bat is ridiculous. I mean, I'm a little bit worried about the weight thing, especially when I see him in a picture next to Kendrys Morales, and Morales looks just like a child next to Vlad Jr. I'm sure some of that is muscle, maybe. Do you see him as a big league third baseman?
Early, Jim Thome just went into the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Thome was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Thome was a major league third baseman. He did that for several years. Now, when we remember Jim Thome's career, we don't say third baseman Jim Thome. We say first baseman Jim Thome.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty realistic assessment for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is that he comes up as a third baseman. But, take this again, Miguel Cabrera is another example. Miguel Cabrera is a first baseman now, but I think Vlad's going to move from third to first a little quicker than Miguel Cabrera did. When Cabrera came up, he was a shortstop moving to third base. Guerrero has a great arm. He has good hands. He has better range than you would expect. But, yeah, the body is such that his main job, again, Albert Pujols was a third baseman, moved to first base. I think he's going to end up at first base eventually. I think it's going to be several years. I think he has a chance to stay there for several years. But, yeah, you look at long term, and what we're going to remember about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in 2040, if we're talking about him, is not going to be about his defense. I'll put it that way.
No, it's not. Last one before we let you go. So the comparison that I have in my mind, and again, I'm hung up on this one photo of him next to Kendrys Morales. And sure, maybe it's baby fat, and maybe once he gets into a major league clubhouse and maybe he's eating a little differently, he loses some of the weight. But I don't know. I think of Prince Fielder. And Prince Fielder had a fine career OPS of 887. He was a 382 on base guy. He hit 50 home runs in the major leagues of baseball. If Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has Prince Fielder's career, is that a disappointment?
No, I don't see how that can be. And again, if Prince Fielder had not had a career-ending injury that basically ended his career as a 32-year-old, we'd probably even think about Prince Fielder a little differently than we do now because, it did kind of stuff him short. This was a guy who, with any kind of normal end-of-career kind of tail off, is a guy who hits 450 homers, who gets on base to go with that. But no, if that would be obviously less than some of the expectations that everyone has. But at the same time, if you end up being Prince Fielder was one of the better players in baseball for a decade.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to ask for much more than that. Now
I
he
agree.
may be better than that, but that's a lot to ask.
Yeah.